There were only two kinds of people who entered Knox Estate: those who arrived by invitation, and those who never truly left. Hidden beyond towering iron gates on the cliffs overlooking the Pacific outside Seattle, the estate looked less like a mansion and more like a kingdom carved from stone and glass. Endless pine trees surrounded the property, cutting it off from the rest of the world, while black luxury vehicles remained perfectly aligned along the circular driveway. Every window reflected calm. Every hallway echoed with silence. Yet beneath that flawless order lived something everyone could feel but no one dared describe. Fear did not exist because someone shouted. Fear existed because Adrian Knox never needed to. The grand reception hall stretched beneath soaring ceilings lined with dark oak beams and massive crystal chandeliers that cast warm light across polished marble floors. Nearly 40 people stood scattered throughout the room. Lawyers, advisors, security chiefs, financial executives, and trusted members of Adrian's inner circle remained completely still. No one whispered. No one reached for a phone. Even breathing felt strangely loud inside the suffocating silence. Every eye remained fixed on the two figures standing at the center of the room. Adrian Knox stood without moving. At 35, he possessed the rare presence that made powerful men unconsciously step aside. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal three-piece suit, he looked less like the owner of an empire and more like the law that governed it. His dark hair was flawlessly combed back, and his cold blue eyes revealed absolutely nothing. Across America he was celebrated as the billionaire behind Knox Global Holdings, a shipping and infrastructure giant expanding across continents. Hidden beneath that public image, however, he ruled one of the most disciplined criminal empires on the West Coast. Every decision passed through him. Every alliance survived because he allowed it. Every rival understood that Adrian Knox controlled outcomes long before anyone realized the game had begun. He was a king whose greatest weapon was silent control. Standing opposite him was Evelyn Shaw. She looked nothing like the elegant guests surrounding her. Her cream-colored sweater carried faint wrinkles from another sleepless night. A simple camel coat rested over one arm, and loose strands of chestnut hair framed a face marked by exhaustion rather than defeat. Dark circles beneath her green eyes revealed weeks of searching, arguing, and refusing to surrender. She had walked into Knox Estate carrying only one purpose: find answers about her missing father. Every door in Seattle had closed in her face except this one. Now she wished it had remained closed. Her breath felt painfully shallow as she looked at Adrian. Not because she feared the man himself, but because standing before him forced her to accept something she had resisted for months. Every rumor about Adrian Knox had been true. He commanded the room without raising his voice. Dozens of influential people waited for the slightest movement of his hand. The air itself seemed unwilling to shift until he allowed it. Neither of them spoke. The silence stretched until it became almost unbearable. Finally Evelyn lowered her eyes for the first time. "I have my answer," she said quietly. Her voice carried no accusation, only disappointment. "I came here believing you could help me." She took a slow breath, gathering the strength she had left. "But I won't beg anyone for freedom." The words landed heavily across the hall. Several advisors exchanged nervous glances. Victor Hale, Adrian's longtime security chief, subtly shifted his stance. Nobody remembered anyone speaking to Adrian Knox that way inside his own home. Evelyn slowly turned toward the massive entrance doors. Her heart pounding echoed louder than her footsteps. One step, then another. She never hurried. She refused to run. She had made her decision. Whatever happened next, she would walk away with the little dignity she still possessed. Around the room, tension tightened like invisible wire. Every employee knew the unspoken rule of Knox Estate. People entered by Adrian's permission. They left the same way. No exception had ever existed. Evelyn reached the center of the marble floor without looking back. The towering oak doors stood only a few yards away. Sunlight spilled through the decorative glass panels, almost close enough to touch. For one brief moment, freedom felt possible. Behind her, Adrian remained completely motionless. Then, without changing his expression, he slowly lifted one hand. Barely an inch. No louder than a whisper, his calm voice crossed the silent hall. "Stay." The command carried no anger. No threat. Only absolute certainty. Before Evelyn could take another step, every security officer stationed throughout the estate moved with flawless precision. Within seconds, every exit surrounding her was completely blocked. The heavy silence inside Knox Estate lasted only a few seconds after every exit was blocked, but for Evelyn Shaw it felt like an entire lifetime collapsing around her. She stood motionless on the polished marble floor, staring at the towering oak doors that had seemed only one step away moments earlier. Freedom had been so close she could almost feel the cool autumn air waiting beyond the glass. Now the path had disappeared without a single shout, without a single threat. That frightened her more than anger ever could. Adrian Knox had stopped her without taking one step. That was the kind of power no ordinary man possessed. Evelyn slowly closed her eyes, forcing herself to take a steady breath. Panic had solved nothing during the past year, and it would not save her now. She had spent too many nights trapped between impossible choices to lose control in front of the one man everyone feared. When she finally opened her eyes again, the exhaustion remained, but so did the quiet determination that had carried her through every unbearable day. She had never chosen this world. 11 months earlier, Evelyn had been living a simple life in Seattle, working as an investigative archivist restoring historical records for the city museum. Her world had revolved around old books, forgotten letters, and quiet mornings with her father, Professor Daniel Shaw. He was one of the country's leading experts in financial history, respected by universities across America for exposing hidden corporate corruption. Life had been ordinary until he accepted a confidential research contract connected to Knox Global Holdings. 3 weeks later, he disappeared. No ransom. No farewell. No evidence. Only silence. Every agency she approached quietly closed the investigation. Every lawyer withdrew after accepting the case. Friends who once stood beside her suddenly stopped returning calls. It was as though an invisible hand had erased every person willing to help. Everywhere she searched, one name appeared behind closed conversations. Adrian Knox. Eventually, one of Adrian's senior advisors contacted her with an unexpected offer. She could remain inside Knox estate as a protected guest while the investigation continued. They claimed it was for her own safety because unknown people were searching for her as well. She refused repeatedly, but every attempt to leave Seattle ended with mysterious warnings, missing documents, or anonymous messages reminding her that danger surrounded her long before she ever reached Adrian Knox. Months passed inside the estate. No locked doors. No chains. No visible prison. Yet freedom always remained just beyond reach. Every request to leave was delayed with another explanation. Every answer created 2 new questions. Adrian rarely spoke to her directly, and when he did, his words revealed almost nothing. The uncertainty slowly became its own form of emotional control. She no longer knew whether she was being protected or quietly contained. Still, she refused to surrender herself. She continued searching through archived financial records, studying company histories, and collecting every overlooked detail connected to her father's disappearance. While everyone assumed she had accepted life inside the estate, Evelyn quietly built her own investigation piece by piece. She smiled when necessary. She listened more than she spoke. She learned which employees could be trusted and which conversations always ended when she entered a room. She was not a victim. She was surviving long enough to uncover the truth. That was why turning toward the exit had never been an impulsive decision. It had taken 11 months. Every unanswered question. Every sleepless night. Every broken promise. Every silent meal across from Adrian Knox. Today had become the line she refused to cross again. If remaining inside the estate meant losing herself, then leaving, even into uncertainty, had become the only way to survive. She slowly turned back toward Adrian. Neither of them raised their voices. "I've lived with fear long enough," she said quietly. "If walking away puts me in danger." She took another careful breath. "At least the choice will finally be mine." The room became impossibly still. Even Adrian's closest advisors avoided looking at him. For several long seconds he simply studied Evelyn's face. There was no frustration in his expression. Only something quieter. Almost regret. Then Adrian walked forward for the first time. He stopped only a few feet away. Close enough that Evelyn could finally see the exhaustion hidden beneath his perfectly controlled appearance. When he spoke, his voice barely rose above a whisper. "You believe you're trying to leave me." He paused. His eyes never left hers. "You're not." Another long silence settled over the hall. Then Adrian revealed the truth that changed everything. "You can't leave. Because your father didn't uncover a corporate secret." His next words stole the breath from everyone in the room. "He uncovered something much bigger. He discovered that your family's name has been tied to my empire for over 30 years. And in that instant, Evelyn realized she had never walked into Adrian Knox's world. She had been born inside its shadow. The words Adrian Knox had spoken settled over the grand hall like an approaching storm. You were born inside its shadow. No one moved. Even the senior advisors who had spent decades serving the Knox Empire lowered their eyes, understanding that a truth hidden for more than 30 years had finally crossed the line of silence. Evelyn remained frozen where she stood. Her breath refused to steady. She had spent 11 months believing she was trapped inside Adrian Knox's world, only to discover that her family's story had been woven into it long before she was born. She searched Adrian's face for arrogance. She found none. Only a burden that looked much older than either of them. Across America, Adrian Knox was known as a visionary billionaire who transformed dying ports into thriving international trade hubs. Presidents sought his economic advice. Fortune magazines celebrated his corporate empire. But those achievements represented only the surface. Behind every shipping route, private security network, and billion-dollar investment stood another organization invisible to the public eye. The Knox Empire. It stretched far beyond Seattle. Its influence reached financial institutions in New York, logistics companies in Europe, private ports in South America, and technology firms across Asia. Governments negotiated with Adrian without realizing how many global industries quietly depended upon his decisions. Rivals did not fear him because he possessed wealth. They feared him because he controlled possibilities before anyone else recognized them. His greatest weapon had never been intimidation. It was absolute control. Inside the empire, every agreement carried one simple rule. Loyalty was never temporary. It was permanent. A promise once given became part of a person's identity. Advisors remained beside Adrian for decades because he never abandoned those who honored their word. Families of loyal employees received protection, education, and opportunities few organizations could offer. The empire rewarded commitment beyond money. But the opposite was equally true. Betrayal was never forgotten. Not because Adrian enjoyed revenge. Because one broken promise could destroy thousands of lives connected to the empire's foundation. Trust held everything together. Without it, decades of careful balance would collapse into chaos. That belief shaped every difficult decision Adrian had ever made. Outsiders called him ruthless. Those closest to him understood something different. He carried responsibility few people could survive. Years earlier, 3 rival organizations had secretly joined forces to dismantle the Knox Empire. The conflict lasted almost 4 years, not through public confrontations, but through financial sabotage, political manipulation, and corporate espionage. Entire industries shifted overnight. International partnerships collapsed. Trusted executives disappeared without explanation. Adrian emerged victorious, but the cost had changed him forever. He learned that emotions clouded judgment and attachment created weaknesses others would exploit. From that day forward, he built invisible walls around himself. No friendships beyond necessity. No unnecessary trust. No emotional attachments. Distance became another layer of armor protecting both himself and everyone who depended upon him. That was why every person inside the reception hall now watched with growing disbelief. Adrian Knox was breaking his own rules. He had already prevented Evelyn from leaving. He had revealed a secret protected for decades. Yet instead of returning behind the invisible wall that always separated him from everyone else, he remained exactly where he stood, looking only at her. Victor quietly noticed the change before anyone else. Adrian was no longer calculating outcomes. He was studying Evelyn herself. Not as a responsibility. Not as a witness. As someone whose future suddenly mattered beyond strategy. Evelyn felt it too. The overwhelming authority surrounding Adrian remained unchanged, yet something beneath it had shifted. The cold certainty she had expected now carried something quieter. Not possession. Not pity. Protection. She frowned slightly. Why tell me now? The question echoed softly across the silent hall. If you've known this all along? She swallowed carefully. Why keep me here without answers? For several seconds Adrian said nothing. His eyes reflected years of decisions no one else had been forced to make. When your father uncovered the truth, he answered calmly, he asked me for only one promise. Evelyn's heart pounding grew louder. What promise? Adrian's voice softened almost imperceptibly. That no matter what happened, I would keep you alive. The room fell silent again. Victor lowered his eyes. Several advisors exchanged uneasy glances. Adrian had never spoken so personally in front of anyone. Then something happened that shocked everyone inside Knox Estate. The king, who spent years keeping every person at a careful distance, slowly walked toward Evelyn. One step, then another, until only a single pace separated them. For the first time in years, Adrian Knox willingly broke his own emotional distance. And as Evelyn looked into his eyes, she realized the truth she feared most was no longer whether she could leave the Empire, but why its king had spent 11 months refusing to let her go. The moment Adrian Knox stepped close to Evelyn, the atmosphere inside Knox estate changed in a way no one could explain. His quiet movement carried more authority than any shouted command ever could. The reception hall, already wrapped in suffocating silence, seemed to grow even stiller. Advisors remained frozen beside the marble columns, security officers stood perfectly aligned at every entrance, and not a single person dared interrupt the invisible conversation unfolding between the king and the woman standing before him. Evelyn could still feel the weight of every blocked exit surrounding her. Only minutes earlier she had believed those guards existed to stop her from leaving. Now doubt quietly entered her thoughts. Their eyes were not fixed on her. They were constantly shifting toward the estate's towering windows, scanning the tree line beyond the gates, watching the long private road disappearing into the surrounding forest. They were expecting something. Her heart pounding refused to slow. She drew a careful breath, forcing herself to remain calm despite the pressure building inside her chest. "What aren't you telling me?" she asked. Adrian did not answer immediately. Instead he looked toward Victor. One silent exchange passed between them. Victor discreetly touched the communication device beneath his jacket. Within seconds, every member of Knox security received a new encrypted instruction. No alarms sounded. No one raised their voice. Yet the entire estate quietly transformed. Additional security teams appeared along the upper balconies. The main gate sealed automatically. Surveillance screens activated throughout the command center. Luxury vehicles repositioned themselves across the property. The estate no longer looked like a mansion. It had become a fortress. Evelyn slowly turned in disbelief. "This isn't because of me?" Adrian's calm voice interrupted her. "It is." She looked back at him. Confusion replaced frustration. "I don't understand. You decided to leave." "Yes. And someone was waiting for that decision." The words settled heavily between them. Victor approached carrying a secure tablet. Without speaking, he turned the screen toward Adrian before allowing Evelyn to see it as well. Live surveillance footage appeared. The first camera showed a black SUV parked nearly half a mile from the estate's eastern entrance. The second revealed another vehicle hidden along a Forest Service road. A third displayed two unidentified individuals watching the estate through high-powered cameras from the roof of an abandoned building overlooking the valley. None of them belonged to the Knox Empire. Evelyn felt her breath catch. "They've been watching." "For how long?" Victor answered quietly. 3 weeks. She stared at the screen. 3 weeks. That meant someone had begun following her long before she made today's decision. Adrian folded his hands behind his back. "We've been watching them too." The room became silent once more. Evelyn looked at him with growing disbelief. "You knew?" "I knew someone wanted you to leave." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I needed to know who they were working for." His answer carried no pride. Only difficult honesty. 4 months they remained hidden. They never moved. They never exposed themselves. But today, his eyes settled calmly on hers. "The moment you turned toward that door, they activated." Evelyn suddenly understood. Her attempt to leave had not created the danger. It had triggered it. Someone outside Knox estate had been waiting patiently for the exact moment she stepped beyond Adrian's protection. Her entire body grew cold. "My father," she whispered. "This is connected to him." Adrian nodded once. "Yes." Victor enlarged another surveillance image. One of the unidentified observers held an old photograph. Evelyn stared at it in disbelief. The picture showed her leaving the city museum almost a year earlier, long before she ever entered Knox estate. Someone had been documenting her movements for months, perhaps longer. Her heart pounding echoed louder than the silence surrounding her. "I thought coming here trapped me." Her voice barely remained steady. Adrian slowly shook his head. "No. You arrived because someone forced your path toward me." A deep stillness settled over the room. Everything Evelyn believed suddenly rearranged itself. She had spent months believing Adrian controlled her future. Now she realized another unseen enemy had been quietly shaping every decision from the beginning. The blocked investigations, the anonymous warnings, the disappearing evidence, even her desperate search for answers. Nothing had been random. Victor's communicator vibrated sharply. He glanced down at the encrypted alert. For the first time that evening, his expression changed. He looked directly at Adrian. "They've moved." Adrian accepted the device without surprise. A new surveillance image appeared across the screen. The black SUV outside the eastern gate was gone. In its place remained only fresh tire tracks leading toward the estate. Beneath the photograph, one intercepted message flashed across the display. Target has chosen to leave. Begin phase 2. Evelyn's breath stopped. Because in that terrifying moment, she realized she had become someone's target the exact second she decided to walk away from Adrian Knox. The intercepted message changed everything inside Knox estate. No one spoke after the words, "Target has chosen to leave. Begin phase 2." appeared across Victor's encrypted screen. The reception hall no longer felt like the center of Adrian Knox's empire. It felt like the eye of a storm waiting to unfold. Every advisor understood that the danger no longer existed inside the estate. It was gathering beyond its walls, patiently waiting for one mistake. Adrian made his decision without hesitation. She doesn't leave the estate. His voice remained calm, but every member of his security team immediately acknowledged the order. No arguments followed because everyone present knew the difference between imprisonment and protection. Adrian never repeated himself, and he never issued commands without reason. Evelyn looked directly at him. "So this is your answer?" Her voice remained steady despite the uncertainty inside her. "You'll keep deciding my future for me?" Adrian's expression never changed. "I'll keep you alive." The words echoed quietly through the room. Not dramatic. Not emotional. Simply certain. Victor approached respectfully. "Your room has already been moved to the east wing." Evelyn frowned. "I didn't ask for another room." "No." Adrian answered before Victor could continue. "I did." Confusion crossed her face. "The east wing is the most secure part of the estate." "I don't need security." Adrian slowly met her eyes. "You need distance." "From what?" "The people waiting outside." Silence settled again. Evelyn wanted to argue, but the surveillance photographs remained vivid in her mind. Unknown observers had been following her for weeks before she ever decided to leave. Every answer only uncovered another hidden question. For the first time since entering Knox estate, she wondered if Adrian had been protecting her long before she realized protection was necessary. An hour later, she quietly followed one of the house staff toward the east wing. The corridor overlooked the Pacific Ocean through enormous glass walls stretching from floor to ceiling. Soft afternoon light filled the hallway instead of the cold luxury she had expected. Fresh flowers decorated the tables. A fireplace burned quietly inside the private sitting room connected to her new suite. Nothing about the place resembled captivity. It resembled peace. That realization unsettled her even more. She had prepared herself to hate every corner of Knox estate. Instead, she kept discovering spaces that felt unexpectedly safe. As she stood beside the window overlooking the cliffs, she heard calm footsteps behind her. "Adrian." Neither of them spoke immediately. The ocean below crashed gently against the rocks while evening sunlight reflected across the water. Without looking at him, Evelyn finally asked, "Do you ever stop controlling everything?" A faint silence followed. Then Adrian answered, "I stopped trying to control everything years ago." She slowly turned. "Then why control me?" His gaze remained fixed on the horizon. "Because you're different." The answer caught her completely off guard. "Different?" "I can replace companies. I can rebuild businesses. I can recover money." He paused. "I can't replace people." For the first time since meeting Adrian Knox, Evelyn noticed genuine exhaustion hidden beneath his perfect composure. His control had never felt personal before. Now it did. Not because he wanted to own her. Because losing her carried consequences she still couldn't understand. The realization unsettled her more than any threat ever had. Her breath slowed. "So I'm just another responsibility?" Adrian looked directly at her. "No." "Yeah." Only one word. Yet somehow it carried more emotion than an entire conversation. They stood only a few feet apart now. Close enough that neither needed to raise their voice. Close enough that the silence between them no longer felt hostile. Evelyn noticed something she had overlooked for months. Every room prepared for her arrival contained books matching her interests. The kitchen always served tea exactly the way her father had taught her to make it. Fresh research materials appeared before she requested them. Even the restored antique desk inside the study matched the one she had lost when her apartment was searched nearly a year ago. None of those things had happened by accident. Someone had quietly remembered every detail. She looked back at Adrian. "You arranged all of this." He said nothing. That silence became her answer. A strange feeling settled inside her chest. Not fear. Not trust. Something far more dangerous. Understanding. Then her eyes landed on an old leather journal resting on the study desk. Curious, she opened it. Inside the front cover, written in faded ink, were only 7 words. If anything happens, protect Evelyn at any cost. Beneath the sentence appeared a familiar signature. Professor Daniel Shaw. Her father's handwriting. Evelyn's breath caught instantly. She slowly lifted her eyes toward Adrian, because she had just uncovered the one secret capable of changing everything. Adrian Knox had never kept her inside Knox estate for himself. He had been honoring a promise he made to her father long before she ever knew his name. Evelyn stared at the faded words inside her father's journal until they began to blur. If anything happens, protect Evelyn at any cost. The handwriting was unmistakable. Professor Daniel Shaw. The man she had spent nearly a year believing Adrian Knox had hidden from her had trusted him with the most important promise of his life. Slowly she closed the journal. The room remained completely silent except for the distant sound of waves striking the cliffs below Knox estate. Evening shadows stretched across the study, making the warm firelight feel strangely comforting. For the first time since arriving at the estate, Evelyn was not looking at Adrian as the man who had stolen her freedom. She was looking at him as someone who had been carrying a burden she had never understood. You knew my father long before I came here. It wasn't a question. Adrian nodded once. Long before. He walked toward the large windows overlooking the Pacific, his hands resting behind his back. Your father wasn't investigating my empire. He was protecting it. Evelyn's breath caught. Every assumption she had carried for months began collapsing. Adrian continued calmly. 32 years ago, the Knox Empire survived a war no one outside this organization remembers. It had not been a war fought with headlines or public trials. Powerful corporations, corrupt financial networks, and influential families had quietly united to dismantle the empire from within. They understood they could never defeat Adrian's father through open confrontation, so they chose something more dangerous. Betrayal. Trusted advisors secretly accepted money. Financial records disappeared. Alliances collapsed overnight. Men who had pledged lifelong loyalty suddenly served hidden masters. The empire nearly destroyed itself without realizing the enemy had already entered its foundation. Your father found the evidence, Adrian said quietly. He wasn't part of the empire. He was the only outsider everyone trusted. Professor Daniel Shaw had uncovered financial patterns connecting every hidden betrayal. Instead of exposing the information publicly, he worked alongside Adrian's father to quietly remove the traitors before the organization collapsed completely. That decision saved thousands of innocent employees whose lives depended upon the empire's businesses. But one problem remained. Adrian turned toward Evelyn. The original financial archive disappeared. She frowned. The archive. It contains every original agreement. Every hidden account. Every identity connected to the betrayal. The room fell silent. Evelyn slowly realized why her father had spent years protecting old records instead of publishing them. The archive wasn't simply evidence. It was power. Anyone possessing it could expose decades of hidden alliances stretching across governments, corporations, and international finance. Adrian stepped closer. When your father disappeared. We believe the archive disappeared with him. Evelyn looked down at the journal still resting in her hands. My father never told me about any archive. Adrian's expression softened slightly. He wouldn't. He wanted you to live an ordinary life. Victor quietly entered the study carrying another sealed folder. Our analysts finished examining Professor Shaw's personal records. Adrian accepted the file before placing it gently beside Evelyn. Inside rested dozens of childhood photographs, school certificates, old birthday cards, family vacation pictures. Nothing unusual. Until Evelyn noticed a tiny silver pendant she had worn almost every day since childhood. Her father always insisted she never remove it. She reached for the necklace around her neck instinctively. Victor spoke carefully. The pendant isn't jewelry. It's a storage key. Her heart pounding suddenly echoed through the room. Adrian nodded. The archive was never hidden in a vault. It was hidden with you. Everything finally made sense. The mysterious surveillance. The people waiting for her to leave. Her father's disappearance. Adrian's relentless protection. She had unknowingly carried the only surviving key to the Empire's greatest secret her entire life. She was not important because of who she was. She was important because of what she unknowingly protected. Evelyn slowly looked at Adrian. You never kept me here because you didn't trust me. His answer came quietly. I kept you here because everyone else wanted what you carried. A deep silence settled between them. Months of misunderstanding disappeared in a single moment. His control had never been possession. It had been protection. Victor's encrypted communicator suddenly vibrated. He checked the incoming intelligence report. Then another. And another. His expression hardened immediately. Adrian noticed before he spoke. What happened? Victor slowly raised his eyes. We've intercepted internal communications. Adrian remained perfectly still. Victor swallowed carefully. The surveillance outside the estate. It wasn't organized by our enemies alone. Another heavy silence filled the room. Victor lowered the tablet onto the desk. There are authorization codes attached. They belong to someone inside the Nox Empire. Evelyn felt her breath stop. Adrian stared at the screen without moving. Because after protecting her for nearly a year, he had just discovered the truth that frightened him more than any outside threat. Someone he trusted inside his own empire wanted Evelyn gone. The intelligence report remained illuminated on the screen, but no one inside Adrian Knox's private study spoke. The authorization codes belonged to a senior member of the Nox Empire. That single discovery changed everything. 4 years, Adrian had defended the Empire from threats beyond its borders. Now the greatest danger had revealed itself from within. The enemy no longer stood outside the gates. It had been walking the same halls, attending the same meetings, and pledging the same loyalty while quietly preparing the greatest betrayal the Empire had ever faced. Adrian slowly closed the encrypted file. His face remained calm, yet Victor immediately recognized what the silence meant. The king had reached a decision. Without raising his voice, Adrian issued 3 simple orders. Lock every executive network. Freeze all unrestricted access. No one leaves Nox Estate until I identify the traitor. Within minutes, encrypted commands traveled across every division of the Empire. Regional directors suddenly lost executive privileges. Financial transfers paused without explanation. Secure communication channels shifted to emergency protocols. Across multiple countries, trusted managers quietly obeyed without asking questions. The Nox Empire had entered an invisible war, fought not with weapons, but with information, trust, and influence. Every hidden account, every confidential agreement, and every executive relationship became another battlefield. Evelyn watched the transformation in disbelief. Only yesterday she believed Adrian controlled everything because he refused to let go. Now she understood the truth. He was risking absolute control to protect one person. She stepped toward the illuminated strategy table where maps, financial records, and surveillance reports covered the polished surface. You can't do this alone. Victor looked at her with surprise. Adrian slowly raised his eyes. You've spent your entire life outside this world. Evelyn nodded. Exactly. She placed her father's journal beside the digital files. The people hiding inside your empire think like insiders. They expect you to search where power already exists. She gently opened another page inside the journal. My father always searched where nobody else bothered to look. The room became quiet. Handwritten notes filled the margins of old financial records. Names repeated. Charitable foundations. Historical preservation grants. University research partnerships. Small organizations everyone considered insignificant. Victor frowned. We ignored these. Evelyn smiled faintly. Because they never looked important. Her finger rested on one recurring symbol hidden throughout the journal. It isn't about the money. It's about who keeps moving it. Within minutes, analysts began following the overlooked connections. Every trail eventually pointed toward one executive council member responsible for preserving historical corporate archives across the empire. The position seemed harmless, almost ceremonial. It was the perfect hiding place. Adrian looked toward Evelyn with quiet respect. For months he had protected her. Now she had become the person protecting the empire itself. She was no longer surviving inside his world. She was changing it. She was not a victim. She became powerful. Hours later, the senior council gathered inside Knox Manor's executive chamber. No accusations were made. Adrian simply presented verified evidence, one document at a time. Years of concealed financial movements, altered records, and unauthorized surveillance quietly unfolded before every loyal executive. The room remained completely silent as the truth emerged. No dramatic confrontation followed. The guilty council member stood, realizing every escape had disappeared. Without resistance he admitted only one thing. The archive was never the real objective. Adrian's expression remained unreadable. Then what was? The man slowly looked toward Evelyn. She was. Another wave of silence settled across the chamber. He explained that whoever controlled Evelyn would eventually control the archive hidden within the pendant. The conspiracy had never cared about the records alone. They needed the only person capable of unlocking them. Victor quietly escorted the traitor away while the remaining council members reaffirmed their loyalty to Adrian. The invisible war ended as quietly as it had begun. The empire had survived once again, but not because of its king alone. It survived because one ordinary woman refused to surrender her freedom. As the meeting concluded, Adrian stepped onto the balcony overlooking the Pacific. Evelyn joined him. The evening breeze carried away months of misunderstanding. Neither of them spoke for several moments. Finally Adrian turned toward her. "The gates will be open tomorrow." Evelyn looked at him. "You'll let me leave?" "I promised your father I'd protect you." He paused. "I never promised to keep you." Those words struck deeper than she expected. For the first time, the decision belonged entirely to her. She looked beyond the estate toward the endless ocean. Freedom waited beyond the gates. So did uncertainty. Behind her stood the king who had protected her without asking for trust. Ahead lay a life where she could disappear forever. Adrian remained silent. He would not choose for her again. As dawn approached, Evelyn realized the greatest decision of her life had finally arrived. Would she walk away forever? Or would she choose to stand beside the king and help rebuild the empire as its future queen? The gates of Knox Estate stood open for the first time in almost a year. Morning sunlight stretched across the long stone driveway, turning the Pacific beyond the cliffs into a sheet of gold. The security teams remained at their positions, but their expressions had changed. There was no longer an invisible prison surrounding the estate. Adrian Knox had kept his promise. Evelyn Shaw was free to leave whenever she wished. No one stopped her. No one spoke. Every advisor, every executive, and every member of the Knox Empire quietly watched from a respectful distance. The decision belonged entirely to her. Evelyn walked slowly toward the open gates, her footsteps echoing across the courtyard. 11 months earlier, reaching those gates had been the only thing she wanted. Every sleepless night had been filled with dreams of escaping the estate and reclaiming the ordinary life that had been stolen from her. Now, standing only a few steps away from freedom, she realized something had changed. Not the gates. Not the estate. She turned back toward the people waiting behind her. She no longer saw strangers serving a feared king. She saw employees whose families depended upon the empire. Researchers whose work protected thousands of jobs. Security officers who had quietly shielded her from dangers she had never known existed. She remembered the businesses restored after the hidden conspiracy was exposed. She remembered the innocent people whose lives had nearly been destroyed because of one act of betrayal. She finally understood what her father had spent decades trying to preserve. This empire was never meant to survive through fear alone. It survived through responsibility. Adrian remained exactly where he had been all morning. He did not call her name. He did not ask her to stay. For the first time since they met, the king surrendered complete control over the future. Evelyn smiled softly. That single act answered every question she had carried inside her heart. Slowly, she turned away from the open gates and walked back. Not because she had nowhere else to go. Because she had finally found somewhere she truly belonged. Every person standing inside the courtyard understood the meaning of her choice. She had not been persuaded. She had not been commanded. She had chosen. When Evelyn stopped in front of Adrian, the silence surrounding them felt completely different from the silence they had shared months earlier. It no longer carried uncertainty. It carried understanding. "I spent almost a year believing I was fighting to escape you," she said quietly. She took a slow breath. "But I was really fighting to become strong enough to choose my own future." Adrian's calm expression softened. "And now?" Evelyn looked directly into his eyes. "Now I choose it." The words settled gently across the courtyard. Victor lowered his head with quiet respect. The senior council followed. One after another, the empire's leaders acknowledged Evelyn not as a guest, not as someone under protection, but as an equal. During the weeks that followed, the Knox Empire changed in ways many believed impossible. Independent oversight replaced unquestioned authority. Historical archives were opened under transparent supervision. Educational foundations created by Professor Daniel Shaw expanded across the country. Every major decision affecting ordinary families required Evelyn's approval alongside Adrian's. The king still led with unwavering strength. But beside him now stood a queen whose greatest power came from compassion instead of fear. She was not a victim. She became powerful. She became the woman capable of balancing authority with humanity, proving that true leadership was measured not by control alone, but by loyalty earned through trust. As evening settled over the Pacific, Adrian and Evelyn stood together on the highest balcony overlooking the ocean. Neither needed to speak. Everything that mattered had already been chosen. Far beyond the estate. Across the water. Inside the penthouse of an unfinished skyscraper overlooking Seattle, a lone figure quietly lowered a pair of high-powered binoculars. Several photographs of Adrian and Evelyn rested across a polished black desk. One image showed the king standing beside his new queen. Another showed Evelyn wearing the silver pendant that still held the Empire's greatest secret. The stranger smiled faintly before sending a secure encrypted message. Only 2 words appeared on the screen. Queen confirmed. The reply arrived seconds later. Begin observation. Because while the Nox Empire believed peace had finally arrived, someone even more patient, more powerful, and completely unknown, had just begun watching the Queen. If this story kept you guessing until the very last moment, make sure to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves cinematic mafia romance filled with unforgettable twists, powerful emotions, and characters who stay with you long after the story ends. Every bit of your support helps us bring even bigger stories, stronger queens, and more unexpected endings to life. But before you leave, here's one question I genuinely want your opinion on. If you were Evelyn after learning the entire truth, would you have walked away through the open gates, or would you have stayed beside Adrian and helped rebuild the empire? There isn't a right or wrong answer, and that's exactly why I want to hear yours. Drop your choice and the reason behind it in the comments. I read them all, and your perspective might inspire the next unforgettable story.